For my final year project, I wanted to recreate one of my characters in the style of Marvel Rivals. I started my research by looking at character models from the game. I looked at various aspects of these models, such as the texturing, the topology, and how UVs were utilized within these characters. I also kept in mind the vertices and polygon usage within the models. I begun thinking about the shader side of things early on as well, as a lot of the model, how it appears in game, is carried by the shaders and the hand painted textures. In order to put my character more into the realm of Marvel Rivals, I also redesigned it to fit more within the design constraints. For the blockout, I started it in Maya and used primitive shapes such as cubes and deformed them to a point to make the basic shape of the character. I prefer to work in Maya when I'm starting a block out, as I feel like it gives me more control over the general shape of things than in a sculpting program. I then imported these base shapes into Nomad Sculpt, where I did all of the sculpting process. During the stage, I also used vertex colours on areas I would want to add to in the retopology step, as there was a lot of hard surface detailing I wanted to add. In the retopology stage, I started on the face and head area first, as I knew that if I wanted to modify anything, this would be the area with the most modifications. After, I started on the chest and neck area, but I quickly realised with the chest that I would have to add a lot more stuff than I originally first thought, such as the inner part of the arm and the underneath, because it's hollowed, and I totally forgot to think about that in the planning stage, and I had a lot of back and forth of going back to that area and building upon it. It took me a few attempts to get the paneling looking right as well. I feel like I figured it out by the time I finished the crotch area and the paneling on that, and I realised that it would really help if I had a inner mesh to build on top of, so I did that. I also used a mecha artist I follow on Twitter's work as reference for the inside of the shoulder area. I have the link to this artist's work in the slideshow. Finally, I did the asymmetrical components. The chest tube was made by following a curve with a sweep mesh. I then added evenly spaced out loop cuts and shrunk one in a sequence repeated throughout the entire cylinder, and that's how it got its shape. The pouches were made by copying the base mesh and enlarging it so it looked like it fit over it, but the strap parts that are sticking out from the straps that are circling the entire arm are built from a sweep mesh curve in a rectangular shape and slightly modified to make it less square. To get started on the texturing, I followed part of this tutorial that showed you how to achieve the arcane style of texturing in Substance Painter. It did take me a while to leave behind the comfort of fill layers and masks for the more ease and control of the paint layers. A lot of this hand painting was very repetitive work. In order to combat this, I changed which component I was working on every so often, so I don't get sick of working on the same thing. Thankfully, most of the work was symmetrical, especially on the arms and the legs. The only parts that I made asymmetrical were the parts of the body in the middle, as I noticed a lot of Marvel Rivals characters tended to not be symmetrical in textures from like the top of the head to the bottom of the torso. For his weapon, I based it heavily off some previous artwork and off nail guns. I felt like using nail guns as reference would be cool as they have a unique form factor. For the gun model, I followed the concept art as a reference, and I used primitive shapes such as squares and cylinders to build with. For the textures, I used the same techniques that I used on the character. I did feel as though the textures on the gun were a bit more complicated as I tried to make it look metallic through the use of hand painting. This is the appearance of my final model within Substance Painter with all of its accessories. The fabric components are a single-sided plane. For the fabric parts to render properly in Blender, I had to duplicate them and reverse the normals. I also had to manually correct some of the textures in another art program. This is because some aspects were blocked by parts of the mesh when I was trying to mirror the paint in Substance Painter. For the UVs, I had 7 different sets. I tried to replicate how it would have been separated within Marvel Rivals. The normals were made with a combination of baking within Substance and hand painting some parts on, such as the seam lines on parts of the armoured pieces. Within my renders, I ended up not utilising the metallic and roughness UV maps, as I found they were in conflict with the shader and made parts either too dark or completely black. I also had some emissives for the eyes and part of the tubes in the lower belly area. I downloaded a shader to use in Blender, as someone already had nailed the Marvel Rivals look within it. I also used some videos to help me implement shape keys and drivers to move them. Here's the bone and armature layout. There is also some reverse IKs here, which are shown in the pale yellow. I also used IKs to make the tube follow with the body. Shape keys were added for the eyes and mouth, however I only added drivers to the eye area. Here's some quick poses I did for early renders. A quick demonstration of the Blender rig. It's not perfect, but I feel like it does the job that I want it to do. And I learned quite a lot with shape keys and drivers. Within Blender, I did have like 2 separate rigs which were very similar. One of them was holding a gun and the other one was with the gun just dangling. I found a portion of a map from Marvel Rivals ported to Blender and I decided I'd use this. The Blender renders I did with this didn't turn out very good, as the map portion was ported to Blender 5.0 and newer, and they removed a render option that I was using in the older version of Blender, and I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. In the end though, I was gonna try and import it to Unreal anyway, which was tedious, but I managed. Here is the shader I use within Unreal. I also followed a tutorial for this. Here's a look around of the scene in Unreal. I did have to refigure out the size. As you can see, one of them is really small and it is the original one I imported into Unreal. There is some issues with the Marvel Rivals map that I imported from Blender, but I just made sure not to include those areas when I made a render. And finally, here all the renders are made either in Blender or Unreal. Thank you so much for listening and watching.